Hello watch lovers, a very warm welcome back to the channel. My name is Stian and today we have a really iconic watch on the bench. A Gruen Curvex. I bought this watch on eBay and it was serviced apparently. So stick around to see how true that is. For those of you who don't know the brand, Grun was an American brand, but they pretty much made all the watches in Switzerland. Initially they actually made them in Germany, that's where the founder was originally from. A gentleman called Gruen, but Gruen is a little bit difficult to spell and pronounce in English, so that's why he changed it to Gruen. We see the watch is running and it has the original curved crystal as well. Let's see how well it runs. A little bit disconcerting that the lines are not straight. That does point to some wear in the watch. Let's get to that later. We're first taking off this very cool bracelet, which I don't think is original, but it looks pretty much like it should be original with the style and the curves and everything. Inside the case back we see it's caliber 370 and style 750. When we buy one of these watches we should make sure that those actually match, so that the caliber number in the case back matches with the caliber that is in the watch. Luckily this one does. So I mentioned that Gruen was an American company, and for a while in the 1930s they were actually the biggest in terms of revenue. But pretty much all their watches were made in Switzerland. And it's also a story that involves a pretty famous brand nowadays called Rolex. So the thing is, when Dietrich Gruen founded the Gruen watch company together with his sons, they decided to make the watches in Switzerland basically. They set up their own company in Switzerland, but the movements they got from a company called Egler. And Egler is, as many might know, the actual movement manufacturer for Rolex. It was only a few years ago that Rolex actually bought Egler fully and then actually got an in-house movement, but that's a different story. One of the predecessors to the Curvex, and where you can see some of the design language, was called the Techniquadron. It was also referred to as the duo dial, because it kind of had two dials, or also the doctor's watch, because the second dial, or the lower dial, was actually the seconds hand. And back then this was a big seconds hand display, which made it quite convenient for doctors taking the pulse and so forth. But the movement inside the Gruen Techniquadron was the Egler 877. And that's the exact same movement that was used in the Rolex Prince. So for those who thought they'd seen that Gruen Techniquadron before, yes, it's the exact same watch basically as the Rolex Prince. And it's important to remember that Rolex was a pretty fresh company back in the 1930s. They only got started in 1915, so they were obviously not the giant that they are today. So they agreed to sell their Prince in Europe and Asia, while Gruen got the lucrative US market for their Techniquadron. Now a few years later, Gruen sold their shares in Egler, and then they made their own movements, and this movement we have here. It's a beautiful little movement, but that's then produced by Gruen in Switzerland. Now it is also true that Gruen manufactured watches in the US, but that was only for a couple of years in the 1950s, just a few years before they basically bowed out. You will find some Gruen named watches from the 1980s, 90s and so forth as well. So there were some attempts at kind of reviving the brand, but let's say the true Gruen brand stopped making watches in the late 1950s. So speaking of the watch being serviced, I suppose if servicing means put a blob of unidentifiable goo on the keyless works, then yeah, this one was definitely serviced. I'm not sure what exactly that was, but if you didn't see it, then let's see it again. Da da da! I believe that is the eBay service warranty. So we managed to strip down almost the entire watch. The main thing we have to disassemble is the barrel. Inside the barrel you have the mainspring, and that's the only source of power in a mechanical watch. In the center of the mainspring is a barrel arbor. That was very tight in this one. Combine that with a shallow barrel. Scary. When this happens, then the first thing we do is check if the mainspring has been damaged, been bent, or otherwise damaged. That's not the case here, so we can still use it. And I wasn't really that scared. I mean, I've been a married man for quite a while now, so, you know, it takes a little more than just a mainspring to scare me. And I hope my wife isn't listening to this, because I really hope she doesn't get mad at me. So we're going to clean the pivot points of these different wheels a little bit. And then we're going to put everything into the watch cleaning machine. And with the cleaning machine doing a nice job for us, we're going to put our feet up. What? Oh, okay, fine. We'll do some more work then. It's actually time for that recurring segment that I know a lot of viewers look forward to. It's Gunky Gunk time! Yeah, no, that was pretty lame, but what can I say? So this bracelet, it is possible to take it apart, as you can see I'm doing. But I don't think it's been done before, at least not in quite a while. So I think if there was a World War III and then afterwards the scientists would try to regenerate the human race, they would come and say, hey Stian, do you still have that Gruen Curvex you were working on? Because this is about to get very graphic. And no, you shouldn't have open wounds that close to biohazards. I was making food yesterday, and then I managed to almost cut my finger off. Luckily my nail was in the way. Anyway. Now let's get in real up close and personal. Let me, by the way, know in the comment field if this is too much. Because honestly, this is quite gross. But that's how it is if you wear a watch with a bracelet like this for years and decades. And you share it with your favorite pet and your not so favorite pet. Then this is what is left in there. Alright, let's quite literally wrap this up. And then we have to clean our bench afterwards as well. And then we're going to get the bracelet into the ultrasonic. Alright, let's get the ultrasonic going, and the sound of that is not pleasant, be warned. So with the ultrasonic humming in the background, we're gonna start reassembling the movement. We start with the barrel. The barrel is where the mainspring fits, and it is coiled up so that let's say 30 centimeter long spring is going to be coiled up into that 1.5 centimeter wide barrel. That is where the power in the mechanical watch comes from the mainspring, and that's the only power source of a mechanical watch. Now, this mainspring is not entirely new. It is in fact a relatively old type of mainspring. But that's alright. We're gonna try to use it, see if we get decent performance from the watch anyway. Quite a few watchmakers always replace the mainspring. Putting in a new mainspring will give you more amplitude, and the watch might be a little bit more accurate, but we're talking maybe a second a day difference, something like that. And personally, I think it's better to have a little bit lower amplitude. It's a little bit gentler on the movement, and for old watches we want them to run for many decades more if we can. That's more important than saving a second or two a day, in my view. Let me know in the comment section if you disagree, or if you agree even. So we can see that this watch does not have shock settings, which means it's an old watch. From what I can find, this is a 1951 model. The movement type, the 370, was the last of the Curvex movements. And from what I know, it was never produced with shock settings, but I might be right. Let me know in the comments if anyone knows better. But we can see that the movement is very nicely made. It is very good quality. As I mentioned, this is not an Eigler movement, but it's definitely in the same quality range. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting some of the parts into a product called Fixodrop. And what Fixodrop does is that it leaves a very thin film on the surface. And that film helps lubrication stay in place better. Because in mechanical watches, you do want lubrication, but very, very little and only in specific spots. So having, let's say, random lubrication running around inside a watch is actually really bad. There is so little force, so little power inside a watch. So if you do get lubrication, especially thicker lubrication in places it shouldn't be, then you're gonna have problems very soon. And if the lubrication, some oil comes onto the hairspring, for instance, the hairspring as we see here on the balance wheel, then you'll have issues with the timekeeping. Alright, let's put in a balance and see if it oscillates freely. And that looks very nice. Alright, with the balance in order, let's turn our attention to the rest of the movement. We're going to start by reassembling the barrel bridge. As the name says, that's the bridge that's keeping the barrel in place. And on the underside of it we had the click. And then the ratchet wheel fits on top of the barrel. So in most senses, this is a very simple movement. No complications whatsoever. One of the things that Grun marketed pretty heavily around this watch was the fact that it is of course curved, and the movement itself is also curved. And their argument was that with a curved movement you basically utilize the space inside the watch much better. Which is true, of course. Small watches, small movements like this one with small balance wheels will generally suffer a little bit when it comes to timekeeping. But the watches are of very good quality, and we see that the movement is very nicely made, nicely decorated. And it hasn't been abused too badly by previous watchmakers or watch repairers. Apart from that, I have no idea what it was, blob of some kind of goo. I can guess, but I'm not sure I want my brain to have that image inside it for too long. If anyone has seen that kind of brown goo somewhere, oh, maybe I shouldn't go down that road. Okay, let's... Alright, let's focus on the movement. So we're putting a little bit of relatively thick oil on these pivot points where the parts rotate. Over on the dial side, and that's where you can really see the curve of the movement really well. We're first putting on the cannon pinion. The cannon pinion got its name because it sort of resembles a cannon, given that it's most commonly a tube. This one is not a tube, simply because there's no seconds wheel or seconds pinion that needs to go through it. But it's got a very important function, and that function is to transfer the power from the train side of the movement to the dial side. And the way it does that is that you saw we had to press it on, so it's friction fit onto the extended arbor of the center wheel that we put on the other side.
Hello. What's bro?
My son has been struggling with some pain in his knees. It's kind of difficult to know with kids whether they're actually having pain or if they just want to get out of something. My son is somewhat ambivalent to football. Football as in soccer for the US crowd. The thing is, he really likes playing matches, but he doesn't like practicing. So it's a bit difficult sometimes. But that's life as a parent, I suppose. My son is also getting close to 10 years old. And in Switzerland they have to actually decide relatively early on what they want to be when they grow up. So it's still quite common in Switzerland to have apprenticeships. because there's still a relatively sizable number of industries that rely on apprentices, such as watchmaking, of course. And would make me very happy if he and I could work together, of course. Alright, we got the movement back together. We're gonna lubricate the pallet fork, which is actually a little bit tricky on this watch, especially if you want to actually videotape it. All movements have two inspection holes on the other side, so you can actually oil the pallets from the other side of the movement, which is easier for this one, but we manage in the end. Then we can put the balance in and see if it starts. And that is nice to see. Alright, let's oil different jewel holes and pivots. Then we'll give the watch a little bit more wind, and then we can demagnetize it and put it on a time grapher. So the lines are still not entirely straight. The amplitude is also a little bit low, but we didn't change the mainspring. So we're going to be happy with that. Let's then turn our attention to the case and the crystal. You see, when we take the crystal out, it's been glued in place, which is very common for these rectangular crystals. The case is 10 karat gold filled, which is a little bit stronger than gold plated. The case is actually in a really nice condition. It has a little bit of wear along the edges, but not enough to in any way warrant a replating of it. Also not too much gunk in the case itself. I guess that was saved for the bracelet. So for the case, we're going to do the same thing as for the bracelet. After taking off the gunk and the glue for this one, we're then going to put it in the ultrasonic. No, that ain't the sound the ultrasonic makes, but I thought exposing you guys to that horrible sound twice in one video would be a little bit too much. So the dial of the watch is in really nice condition. And that is a good thing, because there's not too much that can be done if a dial is in bad condition, apart from refinishing it. And that's something we generally don't want to do if we don't really have to. We're going to take away some of the, let's say, top surface dirt with lukewarm water and a Q-tip. And we don't rub, we roll the Q-tip, dry Q-tip, to take the water off again. Alright, then it's time to put the dial back on. As you might imagine, the hands are also a little bit curved. Because of course, especially the minute and hour hand, they are sort of at the peak of the mountain. So to make sure that they don't take up more space than absolutely necessary, they're a little bit curved to follow the dial. Clean them up a little bit with Rodico as we put them on, and that's enough to make them nice and shiny again. So this is not a very valuable watch. The Technic Quadrant is actually quite valuable, a few thousand typically for one in good condition. But a Curvex in good condition, even with everything original, you still probably won't have to pay much more than $300–400. So that's pretty good value. Of course, the size is pretty different from what is modern today. Luckily, the sizes of wristwatches has tempered a little bit. You still see people wearing these monstrosity 50mm watches, but thankfully not as often. And that's a very nice dial and hands. Alright, time to case the movement. As you might imagine, this is not a diver's watch. It will be splash resistant, but that's pretty much it as well, of course. We're gonna take out a few of the scratches on the crystal. Crystal is in really good condition, so it's not a lot to be done there, but can take some of them out. Then we're going to use a special glue for this case. It's a glue called Minecol. So it's really meant for mineral crystals, but it works for any crystal really. The thing is that it needs ultraviolet light to cure, which really means two things. We need an ultraviolet lamp first of all, and the glue also needs to be stored in a black bottle it comes in so that it doesn't cure just by being out in the sunlight. So I have this machine from my hand modeling days. I used to sleep with my right hand inside this machine so that my right hand would get the perfect tan for those excellent photo shoots of, watches and dishwashing gloves, transparent ones of course, and public health safety stuff for hands. Anyway, after curing the glue, we can put the case back on. And then the only thing remaining is the bracelet. We're gonna very lightly polish the bracelet. It was quite discolored. That's the main reason for doing this, but also to make it just a little bit more shiny again. As you saw, I did not polish the case. It's not very thick layer of gold on it, so I don't want to risk taking more of that off. But the case is already in good condition, so I think that's the right thing to do. Let me know if you disagree. There are also two leather inserts in the bracelet, and those we can of course not put in a cleaning machine or polish for that sake. So just going to gently clean them with a wet wipe. And in the little corners and the grooves we're going to use a toothpick or a pegwood, to be honest. And together that should make it clean enough. Alright, with the bracelet cleaned up, we can then put it back together. And then we're almost ready for seeing the watch on the wrist. Alright, let's put the bracelet on and see how the watch looks. Not too shabby, I think. Before seeing the watch on the wrist, I'd just like to remind everyone that at vintagewatchservices.eu you'll always find more than 100 beautiful vintage watches. And as a YouTube subscriber, you can contact us to get 10% off. And there we have it. A Gruen Curvex from 1951. And we see my wrist is somewhat too big for that stretch bracelet, but it's still a very cool bracelet and a very cool watch. Hope you liked this video. If you did, then consider subscribing. We'll be back with another video shortly. Until then, ta-ta.